Flight 447 was supposed to be a normal trip. Just a regular plane full of tired travelers, families, and business people. Until the aircraft suddenly jerked hard to the right. And the entire cabin felt like it was being dragged into a giant invisible whirlpool. The plane didn't just shake. It spun. Like something in the sky had grabbed it and started twisting it downward. People screamed, cups flew, bags smashed into seats. And the sound. It wasn't normal turbulence. It was a horrifying, metal-shaking roar that made everyone realize the same thing at once. This plane is going down. At the front, even the pilots were fighting the controls. But nothing was responding. Every second the nose dropped lower, the spin got tighter, and the altitude bled away like a countdown to death. A grown man shouted prayers out loud. A mother clutched her child so hard the kid began to cry. Flight attendants tried to calm people, but their hands were shaking too. Because they knew the truth. When a commercial plane starts spiraling like that, you don't fix it. You survive it. Or you don't. And that's when something happened that no one would ever believe unless they lived it. In row 32, seat by the window. A quiet 16-year-old girl who looked like any other teenager. Unbuckled her seatbelt, stood up, and stepped into the aisle like the cabin wasn't falling apart around her. While 150 passengers were losing their minds, she didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't freeze. She stared toward the cockpit with the calmest eyes you've ever seen. Then she said 5 words that made a flight attendant go completely silent. "I can help fly it." And in that moment, the most terrifying thing wasn't the spinning. It was the fact that the pilots, the trained professionals, were running out of answers. And the only person who seemed to know what to do was a teenage girl carrying an aviation book. So before we jump into the full story, comment where you're watching from, and if you enjoy real-life cinematic stories like this, hit like and subscribe, because what this girl did next saved every single life on board. An hour earlier, nobody would have noticed her. She was just another teenager sitting on the airport floor near gate C-14, legs crossed, backpack beside her. Wearing faded sneakers, plain jeans, and an old gray t-shirt that looked like it had been washed 100 times. Her hair was tied back messy, like she didn't care how she looked. And honestly, she didn't. Because she wasn't scrolling on her phone like everyone else. She wasn't watching TikToks or listening to music. She was reading a thick book that looked like it belonged in a pilot's office, not in a teenager's hands. The pages were packed with cockpit diagrams, emergency checklists, and technical labels. The kind of stuff most adults would see and immediately go, nope. A flight attendant named Lauren noticed it while walking past. She slowed down and smiled in that gentle way adults smile when they think a kid is doing something cute. She leaned slightly and said, "Hi, sweetie, you traveling by yourself today?" The girl looked up calmly, like she had all the time in the world. "Yes, ma'am," she answered politely, "I'm on the Denver flight. Seat 32F. Lauren nodded, still smiling, then glanced at the book again. Her eyes narrowed a little like she was trying to understand what she was looking at. "What on earth is that?" "That looks serious," she laughed softly. "Are you studying to be a pilot or something?" The girl's lips pressed into a small, polite smile. The kind of smile people use when they don't feel like explaining their whole life story. "Maybe," she said, simple and calm, then went right back to reading. Lauren chuckled like it was just a cute phase, like, "Ah, good for you." Because that's what adults do sometimes. They see a teenager and assume they're playing pretend. They don't imagine that the kid in front of them might actually know more than they do. And the truth is, this girl had heard that question so many times. She had learned something early in life. If you tell adults you understand planes, they laugh. If you stay quiet, they leave you alone. So she stayed quiet. She kept reading. Waiting to board. While the airport buzzed around her with announcements, rolling suitcases, and impatient travelers. And nobody around her had any idea that in less than an hour, the exact information in that book would stop being a hobby and become the difference between life and death. Her name was Nora Hale. And the reason she didn't talk much about planes was because people always treated it like a joke. Like it was some silly obsession she'd outgrow. But Nora's interest in aviation wasn't a phase. It was the language of her childhood. Because she didn't grow up hearing bedtime stories about princesses or superheroes. She grew up hearing stories about runways, radio calls, and the thin line between routine and disaster. Her dad wasn't the type who worked a normal office job. He was a military pilot, the kind who lived by checklists and precision. And her mom? She wasn't just into planes. She flew them too. So while other kids learned how to ride bikes, Nora learned how to read instruments. While other kids played video games, Nora sat at the kitchen table tracing diagrams and memorizing the names of aircraft systems. Not because anyone forced her, but because she loved it. She loved how planes were like giant puzzles in the sky, where every switch mattered. Every system had a purpose. And one mistake could turn calm air into chaos. By the time Nora was 10, she could explain things most adults had never even heard of. Hydraulic lines, trim systems, emergency procedures. The "what if everything fails" scenarios that pilots train for, but pray never happen. And she didn't just read about flying. She lived around it. On weekends, while other kids went to malls, Nora went to youth aviation programs and hangars. She'd sit quietly in classrooms full of older students, taking notes like she belonged there. Sometimes instructors would pause and stare at her like, "Wait, you actually understand this?" And over time, she picked up something even more important than knowledge. She picked up discipline. Her parents drilled one thing into her again and again. When something goes wrong in the air, panic is the first thing that kills you. So Nora trained herself not to panic. She trained herself to think. To breathe. To focus on the problem instead of the fear. But still, despite all that, everywhere she went, adults saw the same thing. A teenage girl with a book. A kid with a dream. Nothing more. Even at the gate, she could feel the looks. People glancing at her pages like it was cute, like she was playing pilot. And Nora just let them think that. Because she'd learned another lesson too. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is stay quiet until the moment you're needed. And that moment was about to come. Because when she finally boarded Flight 447, she wasn't just stepping onto a plane. She was stepping into the exact nightmare scenario she'd studied for years. The second Nora stepped onto the aircraft, her brain switched into a mode she didn't even have to think about. It was automatic, like muscle memory. Most passengers walked down the aisle looking for their seat number. Nora walked down the aisle noticing everything else. She counted the rows without trying. She clocked where the exits were, front and middle. She checked the spacing between seat sections. She even glanced at the overhead panels like she was looking at the bones of the plane, not just the skin. To everyone else, it was just a flight. To her, it was a machine, and she always respected machines. She reached 32F, the window seat, slid in, and placed her backpack under the seat in front. Then she pulled her aviation book back out. Not to show off. Not for attention. Just because that was what she did when she had time. But a man sitting beside her noticed immediately. He had the look of someone who flew a lot, crisp shirt, laptop bag, that impatient, "I've got meetings" vibe. He peeked at the book and let out a short laugh through his nose. Wow, he said, like he couldn't help himself, "That's pretty intense for a kid." Nora didn't react, just kept her place on the page. He leaned closer, squinting at the diagrams. You know that's not like a normal hobby book, right? Nora glanced at him politely. My parents fly, she said simply. His eyebrows lifted, like he didn't expect a real answer. Oh yeah? That's nice, he replied, still half smiling. Then he added, a little too confidently. I actually work in aerospace. That stuff you're reading, that's advanced. Like, graduate level. Nora nodded once, calm, respectful. Because she'd met 100 men like him. Men who thought knowledge had an age requirement. Men who believed experience was something you could see just by looking at someone. So she didn't argue. She didn't prove anything. She just went back to her book. A few minutes later, the plane pushed back, engines humming low and steady. The safety demo played, people barely listened. Someone across the aisle argued quietly about the overhead bin space. A baby a few rows up started fussing. Normal flight stuff. Then the aircraft rolled forward and lined up on the runway. And when the engines surged for takeoff, Nora felt that familiar thrill spread through her chest. Not fear, not nerves. More like respect and excitement. Because she loved this moment, the controlled power, the lift, the way the ground drops away and everything becomes sky. The wheels left the runway and the cabin tilted upward. Passengers leaned back, some smiling, some closing their eyes. And Nora stared out the window at the shrinking city below. Thinking, like she always did, about how incredible it was. That hundreds of people could trust their lives to metal, air, and human skill. Around her, people settled in. Headphones on, snacks open, seats reclined. Like nothing in the world could touch them at 30,000 feet. But Nora, she didn't fully relax. Not because she was anxious. But because she understood something most people didn't. A plane is safest when everything is normal. And most people only notice the sky when something goes wrong. And the terrifying truth was this. In less than an hour, normal was about to disappear. And on that plane full of adults, there would be one person who had been quietly preparing for that moment her whole life. Flight 447 leveled out high above the clouds, cruising smooth and quiet. The seatbelt sign switched off. People loosened up, pulled out snacks, opened movies. The cabin turned into that soft airplane hum where nothing feels urgent. And for a while, it really did feel normal. But Nora felt it before anyone else. A small vibration. Not the gentle bump of light turbulence. Not the random shake you ignore. This was different. It was a low, uneven shudder that came and went like the plane was clearing its throat. Nora's eyes lifted from her book immediately. Her fingers froze on the page. Because she'd been around aircraft long enough to know. When something feels off in the air, it usually is. Up front, in the cockpit, the situation wasn't off. It was turning ugly. A warning light blinked on, then another. Then the panel began to look like a Christmas tree. Captain Dawson leaned forward, scanning fast, trying to stay calm. First Officer Reyes checked the systems and his voice tightened. We're losing hydraulic pressure. System A. Hydraulics. Most passengers don't even know what that means. But on a modern airliner, hydraulics are everything. They're what let the pilots move the control surfaces. They help with steering, braking, landing gear, flaps. Take that away, and you don't fly the plane the normal way anymore. Captain Dawson forced his voice steady. All right, run the checklist, keep it clean. But the plane didn't give them time. Another warning. Then another. Then the aircraft shook harder, like it hit an invisible wall. In the cabin, people looked up from their screens. Someone said, "What was that?" A cup tipped over, water splashed onto a tray table. Nora didn't move, but her eyes were locked forward. Because now she could feel it clearly. This wasn't turbulence. This was the plane itself struggling. Up front, Reyes swallowed hard and said the words that changed everything. "We're losing pressure in all hydraulic systems." His voice cracked at the end, like he tried to hide it but couldn't. Captain Dawson grabbed the controls, tested them, fought them. Nothing. The aircraft didn't respond the way it should. Then, without warning, the nose dipped. The left wing dropped. And the whole cabin lurched so violently people screamed as their stomachs lifted. Nora's book slid right off her lap. Overhead bins rattled. A woman cried out, "Oh my God!" And then the plane began to roll. Not a smooth turn. A sickening, tightening spin. Like the sky itself was twisting the aircraft into a corkscrew. Passengers didn't just panic, they exploded into panic. Someone shouted. A baby started screaming. A man gripped his armrest so hard his knuckles went white. Flight attendants stumbled in the aisle, trying to hold on to seats as the floor tilted under them. And in the cockpit, the altimeter needle started dropping fast. 30,000, 28, 26. Captain Dawson hit the radio with urgency that turned into pure fear. "Mayday, mayday, mayday, this is Flight 447. His voice shook, but he pushed through it. "We're in an uncontrolled spiral dive, total hydraulic failure, we cannot recover." Those words echoed through the plane's systems. And Nora heard every single one. Clear as day. Her heart didn't race the way everyone else's did. Because her brain had already snapped into emergency mode. Total hydraulic loss, uncontrolled spiral. She knew exactly what that meant. And she also knew the scariest part. A spiral dive isn't slow. It eats altitude like it's nothing. You don't have 15 minutes to think. You have a handful of minutes, maybe less. Around her, people were crying and praying. Some were frozen like statues. Others were yelling questions nobody could answer. And the plane kept spinning, tightening, dropping. But Nora wasn't looking at the screaming faces. She was looking forward. Toward the only door that mattered. Because in her mind, one truth hit like ice. If the pilots couldn't stop this, everyone on board was going to die. The cabin looked like the end of the world. People weren't acting like themselves anymore. A businessman who'd been calm 10 minutes ago was crying with his head down. A mother was whispering, "Please, please, please," over and over like it was a prayer that could hold the plane up. And every few seconds the aircraft snapped into another violent angle that threw bodies against seatbelts and made the walls feel like the floor. But Nora wasn't screaming. Her mind was doing something else. It was calculating. Uncontrolled spiral dive, total hydraulic loss. That means the main flight controls are dead. That means the pilots are fighting air with hands that can't move the wings the normal way. And the worst part? She knew the clock they were on. At this rate, the plane had only a couple minutes before the speed and angle made recovery impossible. That's why everyone felt helpless. Because they were waiting for impact like it was fate. But Nora couldn't do that. Not when she knew there was one thing left that might work. Something she'd read about, something her father had talked through in worst-case drills. A technique so risky most civilian pilots never train it. But when the alternative is death, risky becomes necessary. Nora took one breath. Unbuckled her seatbelt. And stood up. The second she stepped into the aisle, the plane lurched again and she had to grab two seatbacks to keep from slamming into the row. Loose objects floated, then crashed. People yelled at her. "Sit down. Are you crazy?" A flight attendant near the middle of the cabin lost her balance and caught herself on an armrest, eyes wide with fear. Her name tag read Lauren, the same attendant from the gate. She looked at Nora like she was seeing her for the first time. "Honey, no, get back in your seat right now," she shouted over the screams, "this is dangerous." Nora didn't argue. She didn't waste words. She leaned forward, voice low but firm, steady like she was calling out steps from a checklist. "I need to speak to the cockpit," she said. Lauren blinked, stunned. "What?" "No, listen, the pilots are handling." "No, ma'am," Nora cut in, calm but absolute, "they're not." Lauren tried to grab her arm, but Nora held her ground. "I have aviation training," she said, "I understand what's happening." Lauren's face tightened with disbelief. Because in her mind, this was the worst moment of her career. And now a teenager was trying to walk toward the cockpit like it was a school hallway. "Sweetheart, please," Lauren begged, voice breaking, "I need you to sit down." But Nora didn't raise her voice. She just said the sentence that made Lauren's expression change completely. Because it wasn't something a normal kid would even know how to say. "We're in an uncontrolled spiral dive," Nora said, "with total hydraulic failure across the systems." Lauren froze. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Nora continued, eyes locked. "At this descent rate, you've got maybe 2 minutes before recovery becomes impossible." That number hit Lauren like a punch. 2 minutes. Not soon, not a while. 2 minutes. And for the first time, Lauren saw it. This wasn't a scared teenager. This was someone who spoke like the cockpit did. Like she understood. Lauren's hands were shaking. She looked toward the front of the plane, then back at Nora. Like her brain was fighting between protocol and survival. And in any normal situation, protocol wins. But this wasn't normal. People were screaming, the plane was spinning, and the captain had just called Mayday. Lauren swallowed hard and made the most forbidden decision a flight attendant can make. "Okay," she said, voice trembling, "stay close to me." Then she turned and started moving toward the cockpit. Nora followed, gripping seatbacks as the aircraft bucked and rolled. Passengers stared like they were watching someone walk into a fire. And with every step forward, the screams got louder, the tilt got worse, and the front of the plane felt like it was dropping faster. Because while everyone else was waiting to die, a 16-year-old girl was walking to the one place she might be able to stop it. Lauren practically slammed her shoulder into the cockpit door button. Her fingers were shaking so badly she missed it the first time. When it finally buzzed, the door cracked open. And the chaos inside was even worse than the cabin. Captain Dawson was braced forward, jaw clenched, both hands locked on controls that weren't doing anything. First Officer Reyes was calling out numbers like a man watching his own countdown. Passing 22,000, airspeed rising, bank angle increasing. The instruments were screaming warnings. The plane was still rotating, still dropping. And the two trained pilots looked like they were fighting a monster they couldn't see. Then the captain turned his head and saw them. A flight attendant, and a teenage girl. His eyes widened with anger and disbelief. "This is not the time for passengers up here," he snapped. Lauren tried to speak but her voice broke. "Captain, she says she can help." "Help?" Reyes barked, almost laughing from panic, "We're in a spiral dive." Nora stepped forward, and the way she did it was strange. Not timid, not apologetic. Like she belonged there. "Captain," she said, loud enough to cut through the alarms, "you've lost hydraulic pressure in all systems." Both pilots froze for half a second. Not because the statement was wrong, but because of who said it. Dawson narrowed his eyes. "How would you know that?" Nora didn't flinch. "Because the aircraft behavior matches total hydraulic failure," she said, steady, "and your Mayday call confirmed it." Reyes stared at her like she was speaking another language. "A kid isn't going to." "Sir," Nora interrupted softly, but with steel underneath, "I'm not guessing." She pointed quickly at the displays, not touching anything, just indicating. Right hand spiral, high descent rate, controls unresponsive. Then she said the words that made Captain Dawson's face change from anger to fear. "You're running out of altitude." The altimeter was slipping through 19,000 now. And both men knew she was right. They had already tried standard recovery. Checklist items, control inputs, system resets. Nothing worked. And the plane kept winding itself tighter like a drill bit. Captain Dawson's voice dropped lower, desperate. "Okay then," he said, "what do you think we do?" Nora swallowed once, not from fear, but from understanding the weight of what she was about to suggest. "There's one way that might stop the rotation," she said, "but it's not in most civilian manuals." Reyes snapped his head toward her. "What are you talking about?" Nora kept her eyes on the captain. "You can use the engines," she said, "not for speed, for torque." Dawson blinked, processing. "Differential thrust," he muttered, like the idea was forming in his mind, but he didn't want to believe it. "Yes," Nora said immediately, "uneven power settings." Reyes shook his head fast. "That's dangerous. That could flip us worse." "It can," Nora admitted, "but right now the alternative is impact." The cockpit went silent except for the alarms and the deep roar of wind around the fuselage. Because that was the brutal math of it. Risky plan, or no plan. Nora leaned in slightly, voice clear, step by step like she'd rehearsed it in her mind 1,000 times. "Reduce power on the right engine," she said, "bring it close to idle." Then she pointed toward the left side. "Increase power on the left engine. Enough to create a counterforce against the spiral." Captain Dawson's hands hovered near the throttles. His eyes flicked to the instruments, then back to her. "How sure are you?" Nora didn't pretend she was certain like a superhero. She was honest. "This is extreme," she said, "but it's a real technique in military training when you lose normal control." Reyes breathed out sharply, almost like a laugh. "We're about to trust a teenager with our lives." Nora met his eyes, calm, almost gentle. "You're not trusting me," she said, "you're trusting physics." The altimeter hit 18,000. Still falling fast. Captain Dawson made a decision that could either save everyone, or make the last seconds worse. "All right," he said, voice tight, "tell me exactly what to do." Nora nodded once. And in that moment, the cockpit stopped feeling like a place of authority. And started feeling like a battlefield. Where the only thing standing between 150 lives and the ground was a risky plan, 2 desperate pilots. And a 16-year-old girl calling out the steps. Nora planted her feet wide so the spinning wouldn't throw her sideways. One hand gripped the back of the captain's seat, the other hovered near the instrument panel so she could read everything without touching anything. Her voice stayed calm, but the urgency underneath it was sharp. "Captain, listen to me and do it exactly," she said. Dawson's eyes were locked on the gauges, sweat shining on his forehead. Reyes kept calling out altitude like a heartbeat. 17,000, 16.8, airspeed climbing. Nora didn't look away. "Step 1, she said, bring the right engine back, smooth, not sudden, take it down toward idle." Captain Dawson's hand moved to the throttles. He eased the right one down, slowly, carefully. The roar of the engine changed, and the plane shuddered like it didn't like what was happening. Passengers would later say that moment felt like the aircraft was groaning in pain. Reyes snapped, "Captain, we're losing." "Hold it," Nora said instantly, "now step 2. Left engine up," she ordered, "increase power, steady, all the way." Dawson pushed the left throttle forward, and the left engine's roar surged, deep and aggressive. The plane jolted again, hard. The spin tightened for one terrifying second like it was about to snap them into the ground even faster. And every instinct in the cockpit screamed, "This is going to make it worse." Reyes's eyes went wide. "This is insane." But Nora didn't blink. "Wait for it," she said, tight but controlled, "we need the torque to bite." And then something changed. Not a miracle, not a sudden stop. Just a tiny shift, like a heavy door finally starting to move. The violent rotation began to slow. The spiral loosened. The spinning that had felt unstoppable started to hesitate. Reyes's voice cracked in disbelief. "Captain, it's slowing." Nora nodded sharply. "Good," she said, "don't chase it, let it unwind." Dawson held the uneven power, hands shaking. The plane still dropped, still shook, but now it wasn't drilling straight down like a corkscrew. It was fighting towards something closer to control. Altitude, 14,000, 13,500. Nora's eyes flicked to the nose attitude, then back to the airspeed. "Okay," she said, "next part is the most dangerous. Now we bring the nose up." Dawson swallowed hard. "With what controls?" "Trim," Nora answered immediately, "and gentle pressure, nothing sharp. Because if he yanked too hard, the aircraft could stall. And a stall at this speed, at this altitude, with dead hydraulics, would be a coffin." "Captain," she said, "slower now, small inputs, lift the nose gradually, you're steering with thrust and balance." Reyes called out, 13,000. "Do it," Nora said. Dawson applied a careful, gradual back pressure. At first nothing happened. Then the nose started to rise by a few degrees. Not much, but enough to matter. Nora watched the airspeed. "Easy, easy, don't pull, guide it." The plane shook violently again, like it was offended by the idea of surviving. Then, inch by inch, the dive angle reduced. The horizon on the attitude indicator began to level out. And then, the spinning stopped. Just like that. 1 second they were corkscrewing toward death. The next they were flying forward, shaky, unstable, but flying. Reyes's voice came out like he couldn't believe his own mouth. 12,000, leveling, we're holding. For a moment, the cockpit was silent. No shouting, no arguing. Just 3 people staring at instruments that finally weren't screaming impact anymore. Reyes exhaled hard, like he'd been underwater. "We did it," he whispered. But Nora didn't celebrate. She looked at Captain Dawson and said the cold truth. "We're not safe." Dawson turned toward her, exhausted and stunned. "What do you mean we're not safe?" "We recovered." Nora pointed at the hydraulic indicators, still dead, still empty. "You recovered from the fall," she said, "but you're still flying a plane with almost no normal control. No flaps. No landing gear. No brakes. No steering. And we're low." The captain stared at her like the real emergency was just beginning, because it was. And then Nora reached for the radio mic like she'd been born with it in her hand. "Captain," she said, "we need air traffic control right now, and we need a runway plan." The moment Nora grabbed the radio mic, the entire energy in the cockpit shifted. Because now it wasn't just about surviving the spin. Now it was about getting a broken aircraft safely back to the ground. And the terrifying part was this. They were basically flying with their hands tied. No normal control surfaces responding the way they should. Just engine power, balance, and whatever tiny control they could squeeze out of trim. Captain Dawson kept the plane as steady as he could, making small throttle changes like he was trying to steer a boat in a storm. Reyes watched the instruments like a hawk, calling out anything that looked even slightly wrong. And Nora, with a voice way too calm for a 16-year-old, keyed the mic. Denver Center, this is Flight 447, she said, clear and steady, we have recovered from an uncontrolled spiral dive, we are level at 12,000 feet, but we have total hydraulic failure. There was a beat of silence. Like the controller on the other end had to replay what they just heard. Then the reply came back fast, professional, but you could hear the tension. Flight 447, confirm total hydraulic failure, and say again your status. Nora didn't hesitate. Affirmative, she replied, zero hydraulic pressure in all systems, we are controlling the aircraft with engine thrust only, we will require emergency priority and the longest available runway. Another pause, then a voice, sharper now. Flight 447, who is speaking? Captain Dawson took the mic for a second, voice strained. Denver Center, this is Captain Dawson. The voice you heard is a passenger with extensive aviation training. I am authorizing her to assist with communications and planning. And the second he said that, you could feel how insane it sounded. A passenger, a teenager, coordinating a commercial emergency. But nobody had time to care how it looked. Because this wasn't about pride. It was about surviving. Nora took the mic back. Denver Center, we need vectors to the nearest suitable airport with the longest runway, minimal turns, long straight-in approach. The controller responded immediately. Flight 447, Denver International has runway 34 right, 12,000 feet, emergency equipment is being deployed now, you are cleared direct for vectors. Nora nodded like she could see the runway already. Copy Denver International, runway 34 right, understand emergency vehicles deploying, request gradual descent due to control limitations. Approved, the controller said, we will keep your descent shallow, advise any additional needs. Nora looked at the pilots. Captain, we need to conserve altitude and keep it stable, she said, we can't afford steep changes, small power adjustments only. Dawson's hands were tight on the throttles. It's like the plane has a mind of its own, he muttered. It does right now, Nora answered, watching the gauges, so we guide it, we don't fight it. Reyes glanced at her, still stunned. How did you know that engine trick? He asked, almost like he needed to understand to believe it. Nora kept her eyes forward. My dad trained me on extreme scenarios, she said, and I study accident reports, you'd be shocked what works when everything else fails. The plane wobbled slightly, the nose drifting. Dawson corrected with a tiny change in thrust. Nora immediately said, good, keep it tiny, every change has a delayed reaction. Then she turned to the next problem. The landing. Because a plane without hydraulics isn't just hard to fly. It's a nightmare to land. No flaps to slow down. No landing gear to absorb impact. No normal brakes to stop. That meant one thing. A belly landing. Metal on runway, sparks, heat, a long slide, and a real risk of fire. Nora keyed the mic again. Denver Center, confirm emergency services prepared for a gear-up landing, we will likely touch down fast, higher than normal landing speed. The controller replied. Flight 447, emergency crews are staging now, foam trucks are available, runway will be cleared, wind is favorable, you will have full priority. Nora exhaled slowly, then turned to Captain Dawson. We need to brief the cabin, she said, they have to know it'll be rough, and they need to brace and evacuate fast. Dawson nodded, voice heavy. I'll make the announcement. He hit the intercom, and his voice filled the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain, he said, and the strain in his words told everyone the truth without him even saying it. We have experienced a serious mechanical failure, we are under control now, but our landing will be emergency and much harder than normal. Please listen to the crew and follow brace instructions. When we stop, we will evacuate immediately, leave all bags behind. In the cabin, flight attendants moved with purpose now. No more polite smiles, no more gentle voices. This was survival mode. They demonstrated brace position. They checked seatbelts. They repeated, again and again, leave everything behind, move fast, follow directions. Back in the cockpit, the approach began. Flight 447, turn right heading 340, descend to 8,000, the controller instructed. Nora answered instantly. Turning right 340, descending 8,000, descent will be gradual. And every turn was its own battle. Because without normal control, the plane didn't bank cleanly, it drifted, hesitated, overcorrected. Dawson used thrust like a steering wheel. Reyes called out airspeed, altitude, and heading. And Nora acted like a human stabilizer, keeping them focused, keeping them precise, keeping them calm. Don't chase the needle, she told Dawson, let it settle, then correct. As they dropped through 10,000 feet, the city and runway environment started to appear ahead. Denver International stretched out like a lifeline. Long and straight. Emergency vehicles lined up like soldiers along the sides. And even from a distance, you could see the bright white foam trucks ready. Nora stared ahead and felt something she hadn't let herself feel yet. Hope. But she didn't say it. Because the most dangerous part of any flight is the end. And with a plane this damaged, the end was going to be violent. She looked at the pilots and said, quietly, firmly. Next segment is touchdown and evacuation. From this point on, every second matters. The runway grew bigger in the windshield. Not like a normal landing where everything feels controlled and smooth. This runway looked like a battlefield waiting for impact. Captain Dawson kept his eyes locked forward, jaw clenched so hard it looked painful. Reyes called out numbers like he was trying to hold reality together. 8,000, stable, airspeed 175. Nora watched the approach path and the airspeed, and her stomach tightened. Captain, she said carefully, we're coming in fast, but don't force it. With no flaps and no gear, we need the plane to settle on its own, don't fight it at the last second. Below them, emergency crews were lined up along both sides of the runway. Fire trucks, ambulances, flashing lights. And then the foam trucks. They had sprayed the runway in long white lines, like someone painted a path of survival on the ground. Air traffic control came through one last time, calm but urgent. Flight 447, you are cleared to land runway 34 right, wind is steady, emergency vehicles are in position, runway is yours. Nora answered, voice steady like a professional. Cleared to land 34 right, we have 150 souls on board. That number hung in the air inside the cockpit. Not a statistic. 150 families, stories, futures. And one teenage girl who wasn't supposed to be here. 500 feet, Reyes called. 400, 300. The runway rushed up fast. The plane felt heavy, stubborn, like it didn't want to listen. Nora gripped the seat frame so tightly her fingers hurt. Just, guide it, she whispered, don't yank it. 100 feet. 50. The belly of the aircraft slammed into the runway with a force that shook the cockpit like an explosion. The sound was unforgettable. Metal scraping concrete. A violent grinding scream. And then a shower of sparks erupted beneath them like fireworks from hell. The aircraft bounced once, hard. Everyone's heart stopped. Then it slammed down again and stayed down. Sliding. Screaming. Grinding across the runway at a speed no passenger should ever experience on the ground. Nora's whole body jolted forward against her harness. The cockpit rattled, alarms blared. And outside the windows, sparks and smoke streaking past. Reyes shouted, we're sliding straight. Nora's voice cut through, sharp. Speed brakes. Captain Dawson yanked the lever, and the spoilers popped up, catching air like open hands trying to slow the plane down. The deceleration hit harder. Time stretched. The runway felt endless. 150 lives held in the metal scrape of a sliding fuselage. The speed bled off painfully slow. 120. 100. 80. Then finally. The aircraft shuddered. Groaned. And came to a stop. A dead silence followed, like the world itself was holding its breath. Then Captain Dawson shouted into the intercom with everything he had left. Evacuate. Evacuate. Leave everything. Nora was already moving before he finished the sentence. She burst out into the cabin and what she saw was terror mixed with hope. People crying, shaking, clutching each other. Flight attendants yelling instructions with voices raw from fear. This way. Leave your bags. Move. Some people tried to reach for backpacks, for purses, for laptops. Nora grabbed a man's sleeve and yelled, "Drop it. You can buy another one, go." And something about her voice, calm but commanding, made him listen. She helped guide passengers to an exit. Helping an older woman stand, pushing a confused man forward, keeping a clear path. Because even after surviving the landing, one danger still remained. Fire. A belly landing can spark, overheat, ignite. So every second on the plane was a risk. One by one, people rushed out. The slides deployed. Passengers tumbled onto the foam-covered ground, coughing, crying, alive. Within about 90 seconds, the plane was empty. Nora slid down the emergency slide last. And the cold air hit her face like a slap back into reality. She stood at the bottom and turned around, staring at the aircraft. Smoke drifting, emergency lights flashing, crews running in. And then her knees finally went weak. Not from injury, but from the moment catching up with her. A paramedic rushed over. "Are you hurt? Are you okay?" Nora shook her head, barely able to speak. "I'm fine," she managed, voice thin. Is everyone out?" The paramedic looked at a clipboard, then back at her with disbelief. "Everyone's out," he said, "no serious injuries, bumps and bruises, but they're alive." Alive. That word hit harder than the impact. Captain Dawson and Reyes stumbled out a moment later, faces drained, eyes wide like they'd aged 10 years. Dawson walked straight to Nora and stopped in front of her like he didn't know what to say. Then his voice broke. "You saved us," he said, "all of us." Nora swallowed, trying not to cry. "We saved them," she corrected, but her voice trembled. "You flew it." "I just helped." Reyes shook his head in shock, half laughing, half crying. "A 16-year-old walked into our cockpit and kept 150 people alive," he whispered, like he needed to hear it out loud to believe it. News crews arrived fast. Passengers pointed at Nora, some hugging her, some crying while trying to explain what she did. "That girl, she's the reason I'm alive," one man told a reporter, voice shaking. Lauren, the flight attendant, wouldn't stop repeating it. "She didn't panic," she said, eyes wet, "she was calm when all of us were falling apart." In the days that followed, the story exploded everywhere. A teen with aviation training helps recover a spiraling jet. Experts reviewed the event and said the truth out loud. That unconventional engine thrust recovery technique was the only thing that had a chance. And because of what happened on Flight 447, training programs began talking about it, studying it, turning Nora's knowledge into something that could help future crews too. But for Nora, the cameras didn't matter. The headlines didn't matter. Because the biggest moment wasn't on TV. It was the quiet one later. When her parents finally reached her. Her dad pulled her into a hug so tight she could barely breathe. Not like a proud dad. Like a man who almost lost his child. His voice cracked against her hair. "You did exactly what we trained you to do," he whispered, "you stayed calm." Her mom held her face and looked straight into her eyes, tears spilling. "You didn't just survive," she said, "you brought everyone home." And that night, when Nora finally lay in a hotel bed, the world silent for the first time in hours. She stared at the ceiling and realized something that would shape the rest of her life. All those years people smiled and dismissed her. All those moments adults didn't take her seriously. All those nights studying diagrams while other kids slept. It wasn't wasted. It was preparation. Because heroes don't appear out of nowhere. They're built in quiet moments when no one is watching. And on the day a plane spiraled out of control and 150 lives were counting down to impact. The person who saved them wasn't the loudest. Wasn't the oldest. Wasn't the one people expected. It was a quiet teenage girl in seat 32F. Who found her voice when it mattered most. and proved something the world never forgets. Sometimes the most important person on an aircraft isn't the one you assume. If you made it to the end, comment your country below, and tell me.